Okay. Perfect. We got the notification. Okay, so thank you again, everybody, for being here with us for 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. We have another great event for you all, and this one is going to be rooted in community responses. So we have 3 people on our panel today: Jessica Russell, Kiden Regis, and Reverend Kelli Jolly. And I want to encourage anyone to put a comment down, and between Alicia, Lauren, and I, we will get to it and incorporate the comments into our discussion. So please just give us a moment. Whenever we have a little break in the discussion, we will make sure we get to those comments. And we want this to be a very respectful conversation. So no transphobia, no sexism, none of the isms will be tolerated in the conversation. You will definitely be taken out of the Zoom session if there are any rude or hateful comments that are part of this discussion. So please be mindful of how you express yourself in this space. So now let's get rolling. And so I just want to give the panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves and to make everyone aware of who they are and what they do. So we can start with Jessica, please.
I'm Jessica. I'm a therapist based in Freeport. I see adults, adolescents, children, and I operate out of Family Wellness Center. And I really like Christmas, if you can't tell. So there's that.
And then we'll go with Kiden and then Kelli, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kikidan Regis. I am a mental health professional from and working in Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, I am the counseling coordinator at an NGO called Parenting TT, where we provide supportive and educational resources to parents and their families. Outside of that, I'm very passionate about social issues, especially gender justice, trauma-informed care, and the role of religious institutions in these issues. So I'm really looking forward to how I can contribute to this conversation and what comes out of this discussion tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelli Jolly, and I am an ordained Methodist minister in the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas, currently stationed in the Nassau circuit and assigned to the Methodist Church of the Good Shepherd, serving as the Subsecretary for Youth and Children's Work, as well as the social, outreach person for mission and evangelism. But what used to be outside of that, but I'm slowly getting our local church to, embrace this all. So I used to be able to say outside of that, but my passion is also social issues, social justice issues, and creating that link between the church and society organizations that's truly entrenched in the mission of helping people in need, especially women and children and marginalized communities.
Okay, and so to root our discussion, I also want to acknowledge that the theme for the 16 days of activism is femicide. So what is femicide? I know it's not a commonly used term, but it is basically the intentional killing of girls and women. And so our first event, we had Ardra, who is the campaign coordinator of 16 days of activism, and she gave a great overview in terms of the various forms that femicide take, how they manifest in our communities. So most commonly known is intimate partner violence, and this is very rampant in the Bahamas. I'm sure most of us are aware of the horrible incident where a woman was run over by a car recently by her partner in the presence of children and people on the streets. And then another form that femicide takes is the lack of proper and safe access to abortions, which can cause the death of women. So this can be in the private sphere or public sphere. And Audra also highlighted the fact that even though it takes many forms, the underlying denominator is misogyny and male entitlement, and the stereotype of seeing women as subordinate and fragile. So now I want to pose the first question to the three of you. How do you define community?
I guess in the short answer, community would be a group of people who surround each other, ideally people who are helping each other. So I would make the connection as community as people who help. If you would share either a space or a culture, or so, you would have some sort of common denominator, but you would ideally be helping each other. And I want to stress too that community is me, community is you. We're all active participants in this community.
I'll add to that based on, I guess, the special sphere that I'm in terms of faith-based community. Like Jessica said, community is usually where people have something in common. And so in a particular faith-based community, it may be a particular denomination or a particular a mission, or for example, we have like the class system or things where we zone people in terms of where they live, and that they should, as a group, look out for one another based on location. Community is something that, for example, the hierarchy of needs, we know that we need love, we need friendship, we need bonding with people. So community should meet that need. Even though it can be about things we have in common, the reality is that we exist in a community with a lot of people we don't know as well. Also with people we have nothing in common with, or so we think. So a community can also be someplace that is kind of an unknown, but it should always, and I go back to, the example I began with in terms of the faith-based community. The last class I did with some young people, I asked them, what is your church community? What does it do for you? And they say, it's my family, it's my safe space. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, whether it is we are community because we have something in common, or because it's a wonderland of a lot of people and things we don't really know, it should still be, for the greater part, a safe space where we each have our individuality and are able to bring that to the table. I think that's an aspect of community that should always be present, but isn't. But it's pretty much, what we need to define community with.
I agree. Just piggybacking on what Kelly and Jessica said, I think community is a social group that is connected by people who they have something in common. So it might be geographic location, culture, religion. And I do believe that community is also responsible for the well-being, the healthy functioning of each other. And so we kind of look out for each other in the community as well. So I definitely agree.
And given the different aspects of community that you all just expressed and explained, what do you think the role of community is in tackling big issues like gender-based violence and also femicide?
Well, like I said before, it's supposed to really be a safe space. So a community should be, although it has a lot of different people, it should be a space where you're listened to. And a space where you are looked out for, as Kiden said. So if one person or one group of people is marginalized, that should never be a thing in the, I guess, the ultimate kind of community that we're looking for. Marginalization should not exist, because we should all be looking out for one another. And I just I'll make a biblical reference. If you look at the story of Ruth, the Boaz, right, is the guy that they came upon his field. And in that time, the law that was given was that when you glean from your field, when you reap your harvest, you always have to leave something for the foreigners, the outcasts, and the poor. And so that should always be present, that you take care of the people who would otherwise be marginalized or are marginalized for some reason or the other, that you make sure that that provision is always there in your own reaping and in your living.
Is there anything that Kiden or Jessica that you want to add on to that in terms of the role of community?
Yes, I can answer that. There might be a lag in my responses, but yeah, definitely what Kelly said. And I think with community, the fact that there is a common characteristic that connects us, we can appeal to people on that basis. So, for example, the Bahamas is predominantly Christian, and so you can appeal to people based on that. Exactly what Kelly had said. She had given an example from the Bible, and I think when you consider that people are basing their identity and their faith on certain beliefs, you can appeal to them on these beliefs and engage with them. And I think there's a lot of power in these engaging discussions on how we treat people, how we look out for our community, how we look out for our women, how we look out for people who are marginalized and who are experiencing mistreatment. So I think there's a lot of power in community responses to these issues, and we have to engage people to stand in solidarity with survivors.
To follow off with what Kelly and Kiden were saying, as a community, we have a responsibility to the different members of our community, most especially the vulnerable ones, right? So as Kiden said, we have, it should very much be a safe space, and there's a lot of power when it comes to these responses, but there's a lot of there's power to create a positive impact, but there's also that power to create the negative impact. So when your community doesn't present a safe space, it'll create a lot of issues for you. So the example that came to my mind happened here in Grand Bahama. I don't know if you all recall, but there was a teacher at a high school here that was accused of various assaults to young women in the school. And a lot of the women said that let me not say women, they were girls. A lot of the girls said that they went to administration and they didn't respond in a supportive way. They tried to sort of make excuses for him, or they would brush it under the rug. And instead of responding to that, or instead of responding to the pain that those girls might have been through, the response from administration at that current time was to defend current and past administration, for not being supportive. So the ripple effect of that is, should it happen again, they might not come forward because they're not going to get the support that they should have had in the first place.
Thank you for bringing that example up from Freeport. How do you, the three of you, how do you think that we can engage people who are, there's an opposing viewpoint from you? So, we're saying that we're all a part of a community. Hopefully there's some sort of common thread that ties us together. But, with a lot of people come various viewpoints and opinions, different experiences. So how do you think we can create a very impactful community response, given so many people coming from different backgrounds and trying to basically have buy-in from the entire community to ensure that the impact is felt throughout and that everybody feels included in such a community response?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is hearing from survivors directly. So it's easy to have this opposing view or to demonize a group of people if you don't actually know anyone within that group. So if you, by connecting with them somehow, it takes away that sort of mystery that could then lead to stigma, that could lead to judgment. if that makes any sense. Connection.
Definitely made sense.
I totally agree with that. If persons can see and hear and feel the matter, it makes it more real to them. You do, of course, which we know about a lot of issues that have been polarizing nowadays. There are people who you can't rationalize with. You can't be, for lack of a better word, kind in dialogue and, you know, allow them to have their space. When you asked the question, I remember the story that if you're having a family dinner, you know, and it's a potluck and everybody brings something for people to eat, and you come and you put dog poop on the table and say, eat this, and you have to because I'm a part of the family and I brought my contribution. No, nobody's gonna sit there and eat your dog poop. So, you know, sometimes it's like that. And I feel that way a lot about people nowadays, especially in the space that I occupy. Sometimes I'm just not going to entertain you. If it hurts people, you know, it's not going to happen. And I think that's an approach that sometimes you have to take.
I agree completely. And focusing on the family dinner aspect, I'm the person at family dinner that if there's a sexist person in the room, they're very upset that I show up because now they can't tell their jokes. And it's funny and it's light, but I make a point to be that person. And if I upset somebody in that moment, that's okay. But if one person walks away with a changed mind, then, you know, it's all for the better.
Or if one person walks away knowing that they have a safe person in the family, that's, right, you know, all the better.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. I think similar to what Jessica and Kelly said, what comes to mind is Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she said, fight for your beliefs, but do it in a way that you help other people to join you. And so I think what you can do is start with love and start as a place where you get them to connect to the stories, you get them to connect with what you're saying, and you get them to connect in a place of love and not antagonism. And similar to what Kelly said, there are people who they will not understand. There are literally studies about people who will continue to maintain their beliefs regardless of what you bring to them, regardless of factual evidence. If you bring that to them, it's sometimes people will still maintain their beliefs, you know. And so I think honestly, you have to have continuous education, continuous building awareness, raising awareness of these issues, continuous talking about it, and definitely creating safe spaces where these discussions could happen, and engaging people who are able to continue talking and continue discussion as well. So engaging young leaders, engaging people who faith-based organizations, leaders in those organizations where people have influence as well, where these conversations could continue and a lot of influence can be impacted.
And given that we have all three of you are in different locations, Freeport, Nassau, Trinidad, and then also in different professions as well. In terms of Kelly's Reverend in the Methodist Church, and Jessica and Kiden are in the mental health space. So given those different dynamics, what specific responses are being initiated by within your communities, whether it be in terms of your location and or in your professions?
Well, for me in Trinidad and Tobago, I think we have a lot of NGOs and responses to supporting people who have been victims of gender-based violence. We have the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We have the Rape Crisis Center of Trinidad and Tobago. They have hotlines, national hotlines where survivors can get help. We also have the UN and the Spotlight Initiative, who's doing work with a lot of organizations right now to develop young leaders and to develop people to respond to gender-based violence and to help victims, to help survivors. And so I think a lot of work is being done, especially outside of the healthcare system, outside of the justice system, because we do have the gender-based violence unit in the police service, and there is training that happens there. But I think a lot of work as well is going outside, so that the community can be well trained and able to respond to these issues, and able to have these discussions among their peers, among their institutions and wherever they go, so that they can continue challenging harmful gender beliefs and what ensues out of gender-based violence.
In terms of the church, well, we know that any given faith community, especially in the Christian church, is going to have a largely feminine workforce in terms of the makeup of the congregations. And fortunately, over the years, we've had some women that have also been very heavily involved in social work and change. And so I was just asking, I had a conversation with some of our older women, and they were talking about, for example, Judy Monroe, who back in the day would have led the National Women's Forum and introduced the work, which was done with laws pertaining to incest, rape, and domestic violence in the Bahamas. We have, on a world scale, the World Council of Churches has, since the late 1980s, introduced something called Thursdays in Black towards a world without rape and violence, which is why I have on a black shirt. Well, I love black clothes, but every Thursday we wear our black, and it introduces the conversation and ends silence around violence, gender-based violence, as well as, of course, we know what is normally expected from the community is for church when the conversation was hot about marital rape a few years ago. Now I'm getting a notification that my internet connection is becoming unstable, so just let me know if you can't hear me. But the conversation was hot around marital rape, and I know that there was a churches that, or the wider church body, presenting views that are contrary to what we look for and advance in society. But I remember that the Methodist Church put forward a statement denouncing marital rape, and as well as when the referendum was held, the last referendum that we had, that our bishop put out a statement in terms of generations. One thing that I have tried to do as clergy in this circuit since I've been here was make those connections with organizations like Equality Bahamas. Again, women in the church have linked me with the Gender and Family Affairs, and just recently I invited them to worship with us on Sunday past because of the beginning of Women's Week and within the 16 days of activism. And so they would have come, the director, as well as the leader of the Zonta group. And so things like that partnership, I think, goes a long way. And I guess I operate within a system that, we have to make room for different kinds of people. We have to dialogue with different kinds of people. And so just partnering with the Gender and Family Affairs, just making those links is a good start.
Jessica, is there anything happening in Freeport or in the mental health space that you want to add into the discussion?
I wish I had more to say on this. I do know that Grand Bahama does have a crisis center, and we do have hotlines that are running and that are helpful, but we need more. I don't know, to be frank, I don't know what's happening in the religious sphere. I can't really answer that. But I do know that the private mental health sphere is not as, powerful as it could be. And neither is public, as far as I'm aware. If anybody wants to correct me, I'm open to that.
Okay, and so I know we have discussed briefly about having a more survivor-based approach to community responses. So if we could just delve in deeper in terms of how we should go about doing that, and just really recognizing how community responses affect survivors in particular. If you all want to comment and share your views.
I think we could go back to what I said about the teacher and the students. A negative response from the community would mean they're not going to report should it happen again, right?
Yeah, response definitely plays a big part in the after the life experience of the survivor, the quality of life of the survivor. I couldn't imagine living as a survivor with the amount of bigotry and stigma that is just floating in the air on a daily basis, much less what is found with direct confrontation about the situation. And in terms of the church, it is so important that persons are listened to. It's more important to protect the survivors than to, for example, protect clergy, in my opinion. If you have not done anything wrong, then you shouldn't have to put up a wall. You shouldn't have to put in place. I've tried to think about how to approach this without saying direct things, but I've just recalled situations when I worked in other countries where something would happen on a national level in terms of a clergy member of another denomination being outed or found out to be engaged in certain behaviors, and then the conversation always came back to, well, how can we protect ourselves? The reason you don't close doors in an office is because you don't want to be accused. No, your reason you don't close doors in the office, or or get on the front end of it. My argument was better for people who go into seminary and through seminary, better vetting and stuff like that. I've heard people, get the way that their colleague has been condemned for doing such and such and was found guilty, and how can Christian people treat this person this way? And I remember at one point confronting the person after service and being, have you thought about the life sentence that has happened for the victim, for the survivor? Have you thought about what they have to live with? And your focus is on how your colleague is being treated being found guilty, and so the response is so important. I heard the lady on that spoke on femicide talk about indirect femicide, which happens, for example, when persons experience suicide as a result, and the response that comes after they survive the attack. And so the church can be guilty of that too. For the response, and it's also guilty for the mentality that it contributes to in terms of wider society and the way that people face a response in their homes and in their community.
Like Kelly, I was trying to not give super specific examples too, but exactly that. It's about protecting the perpetrator more than supporting the survivor. The school did it. I've heard quite a number of women say that the police do it too. When they report, they'll say, well, what did you do? I've heard people say the clergy do it too. The family, their own family, say, well, what did you do to make him mad? Or the ever awful question of, well, what were you wearing? All of those things contribute to the should it happen again, they won't report because now I know you're not a safe person. But it also contributes to the perpetrator knowing, well, I could do this again and they're going to make an excuse for me, right? And other people will hear excuses being made for this person and know, all right, well, I could do that. And they're going to make an excuse for me the same way they did for this person. And it's just a never-ending cycle of toxicity, right?
And can I say, I just cannot stand the way that the message of redemption is poured out over this subject when it comes to perpetrators, more than any other area. It is baffling. How can you say, well, you know, you can't ban somebody from ever working with people in this way again, or you can't fire somebody indefinitely because God redeems and God changes and all of this. No, it's about protecting my sheep, not protecting somebody who's already proven himself to be a predator. Call me sacrilegious, but I'm not there for that.
I don't think
let them redeem, let them make their peace with God, but they're not allowed to operate in my space again, in my opinion.
You can make your space, you can make your peace with God. He could forgive you, and you could be over there away from vulnerable people, just in case. Their safety, my safety, your safety is more important than possibly stepping on the toes of somebody that I know has definitely been a perpetrator of violence, right? Safety comes first above all else.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kelly, and I don't think it's sacrilegious at all. I've actually thought about this a lot, and I don't think forgiveness is in the hands of the people who are protecting the perpetrators. I think forgiveness, if you think about it, forgiveness is for God and for the survivor. And in terms of the Bible, you know, the Bible talks about render to Caesar what is Caesar's and render to God what is God. And so in terms of the society, in terms of politics, in terms of the justice system, this was a crime that was committed. And so therefore, this is supposed to be reported. And what, in terms of forgiveness, that's not in the hands, and that's not something that you can tell a survivor to stand within God and leave then the justice system to deal with the crime that was committed. It should be supported, and then exactly what Jessica was saying, creating a culture of safety and making sure that the justice system responds to survivors and not and engage in discussions that direct people away from victim blaming. And I think that's a big thing, victim blaming, in terms of what she was wearing and why did she go out, why was she out so late alone, and those kinds of things. And it really puts the burden on women to protect themselves instead of putting the responsibility on men to treat women with respect. And yeah, so I just think that as well, in terms of making sure it's very survivor centered, I think we need a lot of work from a mental health perspective in being very trauma informed with our care so that we don't re-traumatize survivors, especially with the victim blaming one, and then two, in how we make sure that we're not insensitive and we're not desensitized to the situation. So it's not just about removing them from places of abuse and not removing them from areas where they can be violated, but also helping them survive and helping them deal with the trauma and the aftermath of the violence that they would have experienced.
I love what you said, Keaton, about forgiveness. It's for God and the survivor. It is solely for us to hear. If the survivor forgives the person, it's not for us to decide. I love that.
Exactly.
And I completely agree that anybody who would ever be in connection with a survivor, professionally or otherwise, should absolutely be trained in trauma at every stage. A doctor, a police officer, whatever, however you make a connection with a survivor, you should be trained in trauma. As an aside, one of the things that I tell people if they come to me and say, how do I help my relative or friend, whatever, to deal with XYZ, this traumatic event or this thing? And the first thing I say is ask them what they need, because they might be able to tell you, and that we could do that professionally. As a religious organization, we could do that. The police can do that. As a community, we can do that. As a person, I could do that. But there's only so much in one person's power to do, right? But if we all take that survivor-focused, trauma-informed stance, we can start doing something.
Kiden and Jessica, you both spoke about trauma-informed responses. Can you just elaborate a bit more for people who may not have heard that term before in terms of what exactly that looks like and means, along with, I guess most of it is about centering it around the survivor's experience, but just so we focus on that method and approach, can you just explain a bit more?
Yeah, so trauma is, the root word of trauma is wound. When you go to the origins, it's a wound. And so a lot of people think about trauma in terms of PTSD and in terms of things like war and stuff, but trauma can affect anyone, and especially people who have experienced violence, who have experienced abuse. They come out and they are very, in a sense, immobilized and impacted in the way that they seek help, in the way that they seek resolve for their issues, for what they're experiencing. And it's very important for society to know that trauma is very prevalent, and it is very important to treat people with sensitivity, people who would have experienced any kind of abuse, because they are, from a mental health perspective, traumatized people are always on high alert, and they are perceiving threats. They are on edge because they don't know who to trust. They don't know where they can find a safe person and who can help them. And so it's very important to know that you have to treat people who have experienced abuse with sensitivity, and you have to know that you have to create a safe space for them to share what they have experienced, and then to help them process what they've experienced as well, and not to re-traumatize them by victim blaming, by being harsh, by asking them what they did and how they contributed to the situation, but making sure that they are very safe and knowing that they did nothing to deserve abuse.
Okay, great. That was a good overview. And so what opportunities exist for communities to end gender-based violence and support survivors? I feel like this has been a common theme. And so we're really trying to highlight survivors in our responses. So what opportunities exist for a community to band together?
I think in a place like Nassau, in a place like the Bahamas, the opportunities are endless for faith communities if we would care to take them up. Something as simple as beginning with the in seminary was the changing the highly gendered language that we use in worship to more inclusive language, and the effect that has in turn on the society outside of the church. The way that we worship, the insistence on keeping the King James version of the Bible in some instances, in some churches, the insistence on only teaching people and children to pray Father God, and masculizing all the language that we use in church in terms of worship, and creating this hierarchy of man, husband, person is up here and next to God, and underneath is woman, wife, sister, and then children. That in itself contributes to the mentality that carries on outside of the church, and the way that people see each other. Other than that, also being able to, for example, a Bible study series was introduced to me as a woman in leadership, which I've tried to share with every church circle that I've been a part of, that specifically has in this book the scriptures that deal with sexual assault and other forms of violence against women and children mostly. And so we look at the assault of Tamar and Dinah, and you look at other stories of war and famine and the way that they disproportionately affect women and children. And things like that will open a community's mind to this thing called gender-based violence, and this thing called equality among genders, as well as partnership, like I said before, partnership and being able to embrace different kinds of people. I know we spoke about the fact that we don't like some other people with rudeness in their mouths in our spaces of dialogue, but if that's not happening, and there's just like, in terms of a difference between like a secular organization and a religious organization, we can work with those differences and come together for a common good, then that's a good start in terms of the response to this and opportunities.
I think your hierarchy example reminded me of, I went to a forum in Grand Bahama when they were first starting to publicize that they wanted to change the definition of rape to remove what's the term, to someone who is not their spouse. So they organized a forum just to discuss what that would mean and what is actually happening. And they opened the floor up to members of the community. And people got up to say how they felt. And a man walked in and said just what you said, which is, it is God, it is man, it is woman. And then just walked out like it was a mic drop moment. Like he really said something. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't believe it. I wanted to scream. But a few more speakers later, a woman came in and she said she purposefully was not going to come tonight because she knew it was going to upset her. But she was driving past and she heard him say that, and she told her story of her husband assaulting her, right? And I watched that same man hang his head in shame because he heard directly from a survivor. So I think, and I want to say that example to emphasize the fact that connection and really hearing from survivors, it could really make a difference in how we as a community respond to them. In addition to the other things that we mentioned, like trauma-informed training, things as small as calling out your sexist family members at Thanksgiving. Big and little things are needed to create this change.
Yeah. Similar to what Kelly said, I would like to see a lot more involvement from the church. And I think the church has a lot of influence, because when you think about gender-based violence, you consider where it comes from, and the fact that it's rooted in gender inequality, the fact that men are put in positions of power, and that it's supposed to be exactly the hierarchy that you both said, man, woman, child, and the fact that we are socialized from birth to believe that men are supposed to behave a certain way, women are supposed to behave a certain way, are supposed to occupy these roles, and the fact that religion very much influences these beliefs. And so I think definitely we need a lot more involvement from the church, a lot more continuous education and raising awareness on the historical and cultural interpretations of the Bible and how we apply it today. Because the number one thing that men love to say is that women are supposed to be submissive, and that is the number one thing that they say. But they conveniently forget that the Bible says to submit one to another. And so why am I submitting to your needs and you're not submitting to mine? And so there is a whole lot of discourse that you can talk about these terms, because when you think about the fact that the Bible was not written in English, you have to consider the translations of the Bible. and how it was passed down from men who actually were very biased against women. And so I think we need a lot more involvement from church and continuous education on a lot of the historical and cultural context of where the Bible was originated, and the scriptures from before it was translated and what it actually means for us today. Those who identify, and in general, in terms of people who don't identify with a particular faith, I think anybody with this faith would agree that God is love, and they would base their faith on that. So if you are treating people who are outside of your faith with anything other than love, you are not doing what you were commanded to do. And in terms of why did I lose my whole thought? But basically, we're commanded to love, and so if you're treating anybody without love or respect, you're not doing what you are preaching. So I definitely believe that we need a lot more involvement from the church and voices coming out from church to challenge harmful beliefs and challenge violence against women.
I completely agree. Especially the we cherry pick verses to support what we want to support. There's that confirmation bias, right? I remember that same quote you were referring to, where men love to quote that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. My husband, being a pastor's son, said, well, they like to say that and then miss the part where I'm supposed to possibly lay down my life for you, or I'm supposed to do this.
Exactly.
You conveniently miss that part to support what you already believe. And that's problematic. That's toxic. And the church, as you said, God is love, right? And the church has a lot of power to do a lot of good, but the ones making the mistakes have a lot of power to do a lot of bad too. But the ones doing the good, they make church religion, faith, a place of solace and comfort for people. But when you go somewhere or to a person and you expect solace and comfort and support, and what you get is victim blaming and everything that is absolutely not support, the effects are really damaging, right? And that's to the church, that's to your family, that's to your teachers, your friends, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of power there, and unfortunately, there's a lot of damage being done too.
Yeah, and I think from people who are in the faith, it is very important to keep them accountable so that we're not cherry picking. And my thought that I forgot, I remembered it. Even in responses to people who are not of a particular faith, God doesn't override your free will. So why are you overriding someone else's free will and asking them to subject to you? And in terms of biblical scripture, God says no one should serve two masters. You should only serve God. So why are you asking me as a woman to serve you and to obey and to subject myself to you? So that's just food for thought.
Beautiful point.
And then I believe we have to also people to invest in their faith for themselves. I keep saying to the church, if we are operating with integrity, it means that we are ourselves and teaching people to interrogate scripture. God is not afraid of questions, and we have to realize and teach people that there are some things in scripture that cannot be apologized for. There are some things in scripture that won't be evened out in terms of, okay, well, submit to one another. There are portions of scripture where if a woman is raped, and I was trying not to use the triggering language, if somebody is sexually assaulted, the person would pay a certain amount to her father and have to marry her, and then that makes it fair and square. Some things can't be apologized for, and there are many things like that, and we have to instead of trying to twist it around to make it okay, or subjecting someone to some oppressive rule because of it. Learn how to sit with the fact that it's an historical document as much as you use it, or even more so while I'm on camera, even more so than you use it as a faith guide. It's a historical document, and it's a record of how people, human beings, existed and how they thought and how they worked out their issues, sometimes along with their faith. And we have to rest with that, and we have to have integrity. And if at the end of the day we say what the Bible contains is of truth, we know that everyone is created in the image of God. And so how can you then expect to be on a different level of existence in God's eyes than anybody else? It doesn't matter what gender they are, or how they relate to you. How can you look at someone else and think that they're on a different level? And you shouldn't have to hear somebody, like for the example that Jessica used, you shouldn't have to wait for a woman to relive her whole traumatic experience before a hall full of people in order for you to believe her. If you're a person of faith, right? You shouldn't. And so we need to teach people to not be sponges, but to be diggers and questioners and thinkers, and know that, and they're not going to be struck down by lightning, but their faith is going to be deepened and they're going to become better people.
Yeah, and better able to demonstrate love. I definitely agree. And 100% for interrogating the scripture, I'll just say that I am actually reading a book right now from a Bible scholar, Catherine Bushnell, and she was a Christian missionary in China, and she realized that the Bible that they translated they removed women who were helping Paul preach the gospel and replaced it with men. And so she then started to do a whole history and analysis on the scriptures and found so many mistranslations. For example, I'll give you one. The translation for, I believe it's Kyle, that translates into English strength. And for men, it's translated into strength and force and capacity. But for women, they translated it as chastity and virtue. Why? Why can't women be strong as well? So you'll see, and definitely the book talks about that whole hierarchy, head, man, woman. It talks about subjection. It talks about obey. So I'll definitely recommend anybody to read that book and just to get a lot of knowledge in terms of the mistranslations and the historical and contextual context of the Bible.
Let's not even talk about how the word homosexual was never even in the Bible. And that's never addressed, but that's such a big issue used to oppress people.
It doesn't serve our overall purpose, so we're not going to bring it up. I do like, Kelly, the phrase that you said, God is not afraid of questions. I love that. And it goes back to how you said earlier that an innocent person wouldn't fear questions. They wouldn't fear, talking about what happened because I did nothing wrong. So I think that's a good connection to make. And as it relates to believing survivors, I also wanted to just briefly say that as a human beings like to deny what's uncomfortable because it feels easier to do in the short term, but as we all know, it just makes things worse in the long run. So if I don't want to sit and think that my friend, whoever, is actually a womanizer, an abusive person, I don't want to think about that. So I'm going to put that aside and only see the good in him. And we think we're doing something good, but it just does more damage in the long run.
Sorry, everyone, I forgot to mention the name of the book. It's God's Word to Woman by Catherine Bushnell. So I'll just include that in the chat for everyone to see.
Thank you.
Perfect, Kiden, because I was just about to ask you what the name of the book was. So yeah, that'd be okay. So you put it in the chat. And I love how you all were vibing. I didn't even want to interrupt as the thoughts were flowing. So given that we're at the 1 hour mark, I also want to encourage anybody else who's watching to hop in as I just pose this last question, and we can have open discussion and just talk about community responses and whatever was said previously. So, of course, the topic of gender-based violence, femicide, it's a very heavy topic, but very necessary discussion to have, especially in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. And so I wanted to ask the three of you, what are some suggestions you have for making community work sustainable and impactful and, you know, trying to just be in it for the long run? How can we ensure we're not being burnt out by such an important topic and discussion?
Well, for me and for what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago, I think succession planning is definitely important. So not keeping the work within the walls of wherever you're functioning, but definitely engaging people outside and young leaders. So that's something that's happening right now in Trinidad and Tobago. For example, the coalition against domestic violence is engaging young people with these discussions on how to challenge their harmful beliefs, how to have more respectful relationships, and so from there you can continue to continue the conversation. Yeah, so continue the conversation, continue the discussions, and not just keep it within the walls of the organization you're working within, and not just keep it within the walls of the profession that you're in, but definitely engaging people from different backgrounds, different demographics, so young people, older people, people from different backgrounds and faiths, so and continue the discussion so that you can engage multiple people and have people rising up and talking about it.
I agree. Start the conversation. Take it out of the four walls and start it very young as is developmentally appropriate. A lot of people have started talking about how they talk about consent with children from age kindergarten, right from a very young age, and you could use developmentally appropriate words. You could talk about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what words you can use, anything. Just keep the conversation going in any sphere possible.
In addition to what you said and what I was saying, I think the youth right now is very powerful, especially with social media, especially with the technological age. So definitely tapping into those resources as well to make sure that it stays relevant and make sure it stays in what people are engaging and consuming right now. So definitely tap into those resources, social media, make it very engaging, and so that it can continue to be shared worldwide. So definitely that as well.
That's a great point.
All right, I agree with those points. And I think, again, looking specifically at the faith community, the idea of planting seeds is important. You know, people don't only plant negative seeds or harmful seeds, but people plant good seeds. I was on a forum recently talking about how pastors specifically can affect young people. You know, instead of always leaving the youth fellowship to the members who come with their own ideas, mind you, but sometimes making a point to speak with them yourself and on an individual basis. I've tried to introduce this program to our general church in terms of the Shepherd's Lambs initiative, where each of us would make a list of all the young people in our congregation and make it a point to have a Zoom meeting, or depending on the context, some kind of meeting, a safe space with parents or otherwise, find out what their ideas are about the church and what we're going through now. So the same thing with gender-based violence, find out about what they think of themselves in terms of their gender identity, whoever they believe themselves to be, and how the church can plant in them seeds of positivity and self-actualization. And again, that thing about questioning and being okay on your faith journey, plant seeds. Be authentic yourself as a leader. It's not easy, and I think that's why a lot of churches shrink back, because despite the way that churches project this confidence of authority, persons are actually within themselves, and the individuals don't have the confidence to say what they think when it comes to these matters that are not popular. And as leaders, if we take the initiative to be authentic ourselves and to, in some spaces, take the beating, then people can know that they are they're free, if they agree on some of these issues, to speak up. Also, you mentioned, Nia, about how we keep going, how we survive and prevent burnout. We take breaks, whether they're mini vacations or another thing I like and have adopted lately, saying no. It's not always going to be where an Equality Bahamas asked and you have the mental or emotional capacity to say yes, or another organization. I've had to say no sometimes because it's too much for me based on what's going on in my personal life mixed with work life, and then coming to a public space. Sometimes those things are triggering, and I've had to say, no, I'm sorry. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I think can help us in going forward.
Yeah.
I'll also take a moment just to check the chat. I see that Audrey Roberts said, in addition to the church, the home, the school, and just places where people often gather, offer opportunities to discuss gender-based violence and inspire change.
Absolutely.
And so as I just wait for more people in the room to just jump in, I see Alicia said, yes, I was thinking of the workplace where many spend most of their time. And that's actually another question I was going to pose to the entire room as well, because I find that, we spoke a lot about the church and how that needs to be addressed, and they need to be catalysts of having these discussions and these kinds of responses. And I was thinking about how at the workplace, those kinds of discussions don't necessarily happen as often, even though, harassment goes on in the workplace, bullying goes on in the workplace. So how do we tackle every sort of having these discussions and initiating these community responses in every sphere, particularly in the workplace? If any of you have any views on that, please just hop in.
The workplace would be a difficult one to tackle because it has that similar sort of cover up mentality. Like they say, human resources exist for the company, not to protect you. So there's that battle there. What amount of training would make the difference in terms of how, in terms of stopping sexual harassment, bullying, that sort of thing. It's a bigger issue than just the workplace fixing it. It's society at large. But there are certain discussions that could take place at work. There's accountability that can take place that might curb some of it. Yeah, it's a difficult one.
I think it's difficult sometimes because, you have the people from the wider society come together in a workplace for a specific period of time. So it's not like you live together, although you live together. So you're always bringing something, or the person always brings something from the outside to the table when it comes to interacting with one another, which is why it's important for the human resources to take up that mantle and to make things clear what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. I happen to be in a work field where it's like every person for themselves, kind of, because, and I'm losing my thought also. So yeah, it's like you work in a space where you're expected to have boundaries, but to not have boundaries, to be very, very, very open, to always be hospitable, always be inviting, always have people feel like they're your family, but you have to fight for your boundaries, especially as a younger person, because in order sometimes for you to be seen as operating at your best, persons have to feel like they have access to you 24/7. You have to be available to people, and sometimes you forget the word no, and so that could be a source of burnout for a person in my field. But I think for regular work environments, definitely HR, needs to set boundaries and make things clear between people.
And be more for the employee as well as protecting the organization, not make it totally about protecting the organization first.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you about how it's so unique in this workspace that I have. It's like people feel, for example, I was a part of a bigger service a while ago, and so we, how clergy, they process in and recess out, and somebody who was who was a member of that particular church that we went to that day, a man, he as we were recessing out, he was on the side, so he kind of came to me almost, and it was surprising to me, so I thought it was something important. So I was in the recessional line, trying to go out, and he comes over to me and he's like, "I'm gonna marry you." And I had to have a conversation with him after, to say that that's inappropriate. I'm here, I'm doing my job, and furthermore, by extension, you are a member of mine. I said, that's inappropriate. Don't say things like that to me, And of course, he doubled down, and he needs to come to my congregation and see where I am, and I double back down. So it's a constant fight, and and sometimes it's just surprising and weird the way it comes up, but you gotta not forget that that's important, to stand your ground. It can seem innocent, but it's not.
Right. And you don't want to take the chance that assuming it's innocent and it's not. And similar to how you guys mentioned that, there's some people that can't be reasoned with when it comes to their opposing view. There's also the people like this man who doubled down, who never met a boundary they couldn't bulldoze, right? So it is a constant fight. And there are ways that perhaps we could hopefully teach people within these organizations to better manage moments like that. How do we let him know that that was inappropriate? Who would he take that advice from?
Right. Who would he answer to? And the only thing that I thought about it, and I had already spoken to him, and if I went to that congregation again and saw him again, I believe I would speak to him. But the only next step, if it happened or went further, was to speak with the minister and my colleague who would have been in charge of him, But at this point, it hasn't been an issue to take up further.
Right.
So I see that Sue has put a question in the chat box. So I'll just read it out. So anyone has any thoughts on dealing with the conversations in social media? There are groups and forums which are breeding grounds for verbal violence, intimidation, and misogyny.
Repeat that.
How do we tackle conversations on social media, given that, there's a lot of verbal violence, intimidation, and misogyny that run rampant on these social media sites? So how do we tackle that?
They use the right word. It's a breeding ground. It spreads like wildfire, and it's overwhelming a lot of the times. And I know exactly what post to not click on, because I know it will absolutely ruin my afternoon looking at it, because there is nothing that I could do except for report the whole thing. But I don't really have that power to stop this whole conversation. So I think it's also important to note that, similar to what Kelly was saying, say no, set your boundaries, and not, what do they call it? Something like news overload. You don't have to look at it. If that's the only way that you could protect yourself and keep yourself safe, you don't read it. And if you do happen to see it, report it.
Other comments from anybody in the audience, let's call it. Please feel free to put up your hands and unmute your mic.
Nia, I'd like to share something.
Go ahead, please.
So I think a lot of people use social media to vent, to verbalize their frustrations with whatever it is that they're dealing with, right? And so oftentimes you will actually find people logging on after work to vent about work, right? And so it can be that their workplace is not a safe place for them to actually address some of the harassment that they might be experiencing there, right? Or any sort of concerns that they might have, because the way that companies are set up is to prioritize profit over people. And so we are often seen as disposable workers, right? Just sort of coming in, passing through the company and leaving whenever our time is up. And so very few companies seem to want to recognize their role in actually fostering a healthy workplace. So I think all of this, it really goes hand in hand with the lives that people are being subjected to in multiple spheres. And just the fact that people want to separate the public and private so much to the point of absolving themselves of any responsibility. You know, people would, like, companies would say, oh, don't bring your personal issues to work. But how can I not bring my personal issues when it's impacting my ability to do that work, right? And so then you end up with no support from the workplace, from community agencies that are supposed to be providing this, doing this kind of work. And so I think a lot of people end up feeling isolated and then, you know, going to social media, maybe looking for a sense of community or just trying to find a platform to vent because these systems of support are not in place.
Really good point, Lauren. And I think, yeah, people try to have this public sphere versus private sphere, which I think has run its course now. We understand that both intertwine and there should be an approach for everything, whether it's private, public, it shouldn't even matter. And so I see Nicole, your hand is up. You can unmute your mic and make your comment, please.
Good evening, everybody. Any specific advice? So there may be communities who may want to start a community response program. Anything you all may suggest for communities to be aware of? And these communities don't necessarily need to be physical spaces. There may be groups that may just want to be aware, but want to, because the end goal is that they don't necessarily want to break up their family, but they realize that things may need to be done. Is there any suggestion as to what spaces or organizations could be aware of if they're seeking to do something like that?
I'm not sure I understood.
Okay, so say a geograph, so say in Nassau, a community, a group in Nassau wants to set up a community response to domestic violence. They don't necessarily want it to escalate to the point where he gets ejected and he goes to jail. But they want to seek to keep it within the community, to have it where the family could possibly stay together, because not all families do want to criminalize the person, but they do want to recognize that, one, the person understands that what they've been doing is wrong. Keep her safe, and sometimes the children as well. Clara?
It's clearer. First I thought you were talking about a general, like a community response, like for a support system. possibly
It's it.
online.
Well, I
But
interpret it as, but if you have a different thinking, I'll be open to it.
but you're talking about addressing the specific situations within families and individuals. So one point could be if they're part of a faith community, could begin if you have a faith leader who is again trained and ready to begin addressing a situation like this, or able to refer to a therapist, someone like that. My first response in terms of the example you gave was, well, I don't know if we'd want to keep together the family if the issue is keeping her safe. Is that if it's that bad, then perhaps there is separation needed. Well, I would so basically that first point is that what I could think of is looking for a safe space, a safe person who is able to deal with that in an unbiased way and in a way that also addresses the situation, because you have some faith leaders that are so preoccupied with this idea of keeping a marriage together that they would never do anything to help a woman get out of the situation, and that's not helpful either. But in terms of sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say the goal is ultimately to keep them together by any means necessary, as opposed to addressing the problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
Right. Understood.
So I think there were 2 points that you made, which would be a great place to start, which was that he or the perpetrator recognizes that what they did was wrong and that they're actively seeking to change. And the second was that the other parent and the children are safe. Once those two are established, most importantly, that they're safe, then, as Kelly said, you could look to a faith leader, a counselor, to start working with the perpetrator individually, and then the family as a unit, perhaps the children separately, and then get going from there, with the ultimate goal being to keep the family together, even if a temporary separation might be necessary for their absolute and guaranteed safety.
Sometimes there are leaders in the community too that are trained to intervene. Because I got a message saying like a police alternative, like you have probably a community leader, depending on the relationship with, say, a justice of the peace or something like that, someone who is able to intervene on that level. But I do want to say, I mean, the question was posed in a way that the idea was keeping the family together. But sometimes I think we stick to this ideal so closely that we forget that even if somebody recognizes they're wrong and somebody is willing to rehabilitate themselves, it's for them. And even when they have been rehabilitated, they're not entitled to have back the family that they once abused. In my opinion, they're not entitled because I have rehabilitated. It's for myself because I was a crap person, to my family, and I beat on my wife. And so now I want to be rehabilitated. It's not ultimately for my family, because it's supposed to be that I want to be a better person. And after I've been rehabilitated, it's not that my wife, I'm entitled to have my wife say, oh, thank God he's been saved and free. I believe he's never going to beat on me again, so I'll have him back. I'm just putting that out there. In my opinion, it's nobody's entitled to that.
That's a great point. Having that be the ultimate goal could really alter the whole process, and it should be for the betterment of yourself, without you thinking that this is how I'll get them back. This is how we'll fix everything.
Yeah, and just to follow that, I think when you start with keeping the family together as a goal, sometimes you might end up ignoring the needs of the person who has been subject to abuse. And so I think you start with what are the needs of this person to feel safe and to feel like they're being supported. when a wrong has been acknowledged. And so if you continue to keep them in an environment where you say you acknowledge this wrong, but they still continue to feel safe and they're still subject to abuse, then that creates a lot of mistrust and a lot of trauma as well. If this person does recognize that they have been wrong and they are willing to change, they should be willing to engage in the things that creates that change and engage in what is necessary to keep the person that they have wronged safe and for their needs. So I think we start not with the goal of keeping the family together, because if you do keep the family together, consider what is the experience of family that they're going to be, they're going to say that they have experience, to say that they are within. So it's just like, okay, yes, we are a family, but consider the when they recall the experiences that they've had with family, when they recall what they associate family with. You don't want them to associate family with trauma. You don't want them to associate family with abuse, because the whole premise of keeping the family together is the idea of unity and love and warmth and having that sense of connection and oneness. But if it is they are associating family with anything but warmth and love and respect, you have to consider whether that's something you need to address.
Yeah, I think that's you all made really great points. I remember seeing on social media, there was this community, I think African Americans in New York, and they don't believe in going to the police for any of their issues or resorting to the court system, because there's a lot of problems, and that's not where a lot of people see justice. They don't believe it exists there. So in terms of looking at alternative methods to those kinds of institutions, and a lot of their solutions were rooted in, okay, the survivor dictates the terms as to how they want their perpetrator to be treated within this community. Whether it's, okay, you need to go to counseling for a year and you're removed from our community, so nobody is going to have communication with you, and then you come back and then the survivor decides how they feel as a result, a year later. And so it was just a really interesting concept. And then Indigenous people in Canada use something similar, where they kind of dictate their own methods of what justice means for them. And so, yeah, once again, it is very survivor based approach. So I think that is a very interesting discussion that could run us another, hour. And I did see Alicia's hand up. So Alicia, if you could unmute and say your comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines as you, Nia, what you were just saying, and also connecting this to earlier conversations that we had over the past few days about being survivor-centered and not focused solely on punishment of the perpetrator, recognizing that that's not necessarily what the survivor needs or values most, or what justice looks like. Because for some people, they will never report because they only have the police as an option, and the police are going to take the person away. And if the person goes to prison, then they can't contribute to rent and they can't pay these children's school fees and all these different things. So there's all of that to think about. And when I think about the question that Nicole asked about the community response team, I'm thinking about what is a group of people that can be called instead of the police to intervene in a situation. Because when people call the police, that's really what they want. They want intervention. They want the violence to stop. They want to be safe. At the very least, they probably want this person out for a night, maybe not forever. And we could feel however we want to feel about it, right? Like I feel a completely different way, I think, than a lot of people. But it really should be up to the survivor, and survivors should have options. And all of those options shouldn't lead to them having to struggle, having to leave their homes and figure out whole new lives and financial situations. So yeah, I really do want to think about what that looks like, especially since last year when we did the community consultations to find out what people thought we should do, put together as this policy to end gender-based violence. The survivors we spoke to said pretty much they didn't want this sort of like police prison system. Some, yes, were like, yeah, harsher penalties, but for the most part, people said that caused them to struggle more and they wanted different options. So I think we do have to think about what it would look like for social services and for somebody from health, and maybe accompanied by someone from law enforcement showing up and creating a plan for people that is just and that would facilitate healing. And then I think somebody asked a question about social media, and I was thinking about, like, lately I've been seeing a lot of posts that people think are funny or innocuous, but they definitely contribute to rape culture and toxic masculinity and a lot of the things that contribute to gender-based violence. So one of the things that's happening, I don't know if it's just Bahamian Twitter or Twitter in general, but right now everyone's tweeting about, the tweets start with "as a man." So it's like, as a man, I don't understand why you would bypass Pepsi, Coke, and root beer to order orange soda. As a man, why are you going to brunch? As a man, why are you using the elevator to get to the second floor? Literally, these are things that I've seen in the last few days. And when we see things like that, I don't think that if you have the energy, I don't think it should be ignored. Like, definitely, as Jessica said, if you just can't take it on and it's going to screw up your day, like, walk away. But if you have space, I think it's important to interrupt it and call it what it is. And for the most part, these people aren't going to change their minds. They're going to say you're a buzzkill, like they're just joking around, or this is really how they feel. Men should not suck straws, you know, but what you say, yeah, what you say.
Or eat bananas in front of people.
Yes, all that. Eat ice cream. Somebody said men
Is
can't
the
order dessert.
Is the orange soda one a direct quote?
Yes.
Somebody...
yeah, like sweet soda is not for men. So you can see how ridiculous this is. And the people, I don't think, are likely to change their minds, but I think it's important for people who are viewing the conversation to see someone saying, this is stupid, please stop. You are contributing to toxic masculinity right now. You're like putting, you know, the man box, you're making that box smaller now, and we don't need it to be any smaller. We need masculinity to be much more expansive than this idea that you have. So I think that there are some instances where if you have the time and the space, it's important to interrupt. But when you do that, to know that this is my one engagement, I'm not responding to anything. I'm not letting anyone take me down any like wild roads. You kind of have to have your boundaries in your mind before you engage.
I've seen you do that exact, this is my one statement and I'm not going any further. And that's good advice.
Does anybody else in the room have any other comments that they want to bring up? I see we're at 7:30, so okay, I see a hand going up. Audrey Roberts, can you unmute? And then you can say your comment, please.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting discussion. Thanks to everybody. I really wanted to just bounce off of Alicia's point regarding the need for more expansive approaches to this problem of gender-based violence in the community, beyond just calling the police and beyond Sandilans or the rehab, whatever, because in a lot of cases that has not worked. It brings the person, the so-called the perpetuator, full circle back to the home or back to the place where the problem is going on. So I think it's very important to try and gather as many heads, a sort of think tank, if you like, to really come up with some constructive alternatives to that community approach which exists and which is not very workable. And, you know, it almost reinforces the victim and perpetuator concept. And I don't like either terms, but that's what we have now, and everybody understands what that means. So I'm suggesting that what is needed is a kind of model that can be created that helps the person who is in trouble, the man who is in trouble with himself to begin with, and then with his relationships, to really look at that, to not only raise awareness, because chances are he does have serious insights into his own dilemma, but the behavior change, the value systems that he may be carrying around that helps, and the things that he may be doing. Maybe he smokes, maybe he is into drugs of some sort. All those things that might be compounding his problem. I think that person needs a lot of help. And indeed, I do not think that you're talking necessarily about welcome back home after you've gone through whatever remedial help that seems to be working. So to move from awareness to action and change is where you want to go for everybody. And the change process has to happen in a concerted way. I think people need to come together and put their heads together on what can we create that really works and is lasting and is sustainable and also flexible, that will include other changes as we assess and move forward. That's all. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I think we've had a very full discussion. I think it was great that we spoke about what we can do individually, and especially as the holidays are rolling around, we're going to be safely gathering with family, friends, safely, please be COVID safe. And so I think, those small actions that we take within our immediate community, which is family, friends, that really can have an impact in terms of how those people, even though it may not be immediate, where those people are like, okay, well, actually, I see where you're coming from. But, sometimes repetition, and then also when those people have a chance to think, have a time with their thoughts, right before bedtime, you kind of go through your day and you think, oh, well, actually, that was an okay point that person made, with them combating your own views and vice versa. I think that's where we all can start, in addition to trying to affect change in our workplaces, in our churches, you're
planting a seed, like Kelly said, you're planting a seed.
Right, exactly. So we can't overlook that and can't understate that at all. So I see one last comment. Yes, looking to you to do this in 2022, Audrey, thank you. So I think that, thank you so much to Jessica, Kiden, Kelly. It was a great discussion. Any last words before we start to wind down?
Can I jump in with one last word?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I just wanted to make this point that it is so critical that we call out men who are bystanders, because the bystanders, I think, are amongst the worst. They may never lift a hand and do any harm to man, woman, or child, or dog, or beast, but they bystand and they watch it happen. They walk away maybe, or they just laugh it off or whatever. And I think that really needs to be challenged. It's perhaps the most toxic aspect of masculinity, in my view.
I definitely agree. So that was a good way to end. And I just want to highlight an event happening. So we're going to be doing these sorts of events up until, I think it's December 10th. Alicia has put in the discussion, in the chat box, multiple links where you can register. We have on Saturday a dance session. We've done this before and people always seem to enjoy it, to get the body moving and pumping, all that sort of stuff. So that'll be at 12 p.m. on Saturday. Please click the link and see. I think we have about 4 or 5 events left. And so thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to the Equality Bahamas team, to Alicia, to Lauren, everybody else behind the scenes. And thank you so much for coming out after a long day of work, I'm sure, and just, having the energy to be here with us. We really, really appreciate it. So with that, we will sign off and cut the Facebook Live. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your night, everybody.